It's just not technology. It's not just social media. It's just not the vibe, if you will. I really believe it's the Holy Spirit. I think God is really doing something incredibly new in the church and in our times. And I think we as a church have really a great, it's an act of obedience to act on it, but also a great opportunity to say, thank you, Holy Spirit, for answering the prayers for all those people who over the last 60 years in this country have been praying for growth. And now that we see growth, let's just cultivate it. Let's bring people into relationship with Jesus, open our churches, and be open to new movements that the Holy Spirit is bringing in.
Welcome to Magnified Ministry Podcast, the podcast dedicated to inspiring, encouraging, and equipping parish leaders to build thriving missionary communities in today's rapidly changing world. This is the Magnified Ministry Podcast. Welcome back to the Magnified Ministry Podcast. I am joined by a rejuvenated Father Peter.
Hello, Marco.
So I'm really excited for this episode. We're not talking about a series. We're not interviewing people. We're going to get just to hear a little bit about some of your experience being on sabbatical, right? Having an opportunity to pray, having an opportunity to rest, having an opportunity to be with people really all over the world, and have an opportunity to attend different conferences and meetings, just to be in the presence of the Spirit and be in the presence of a church alive around the world. So I'm excited to hear what that's been like for you.
What's kind of funny, returning, one of the first things people say is like, boy, you look so much younger. I was like,
who has said that to you?
Why? Well, I don't know if that's...
What have you been doing?
I don't know if that's a good thing or that's a bad thing. Like,
did you
what?
Go to Puerto Rico and do
what happened over the last 6 years? Why did I look so bad? So anyway, that's I think kind.
Sure, that's very nice. Of people to say.
But it's a sign that I needed a sabbatical, which was great. I've been part of my sabbatical was really doing research on Gen Zs and kind of seeing the places where a lot of ministry happens, a lot of life, all the way from Hawaii. I spoke to priests in Hawaii and a number of parishes and the conference. I spoke in Germany, spoken all in the different places in Poland. And it's just really an amazing opportunity. I visited some places in New York and seeing what God is doing in the church, right? Because sometimes I think for us and pastors, church leaders, we got so focused on our own parish, our own community. We forget there is a bigger church there, and that by observing and experiencing this bigger church, we can see what God is doing.
Right.
And that's kind of amazing.
Well, and that's the beauty of the Catholic Church, I've always found, right? That you can, you're so connected and intertwined with people all over the world. And it's just very cool to see. So, do you want to tell us a little bit of what are some of the things that you did, some of the things that you saw, and then maybe even just start with like what are the themes maybe that kind of came out of all of these conversations that you had?
What was interesting, right? I started by just a series of talks throughout really the world, as crazy as that sounds. It started with this whole premise of my book that will be published soon, that focuses on bringing Gen Zs into relationship with Jesus in pre-Christian versus post-Christian world. And so anywhere I went, I spoke about this shift, right, from post-Christian to pre-Christian, kind of focusing on three important things, right? As first, the fact that in post-Christian world, so many people experience Christianity, sometimes even in a very profound way, and yet they kind of refuse the idea of it, right? So they didn't stay as practicing Catholics or as practicing Christians. That's number one. The number two is that people were aware of kind of Christian images, ideas, teachings, and they just kind of didn't care, right? Or they put them on the back burner. They were not necessarily what shaped their lives. It was what informed some of their behavior. So the behavior was still pretty Christian, pretty Catholic, but it wasn't directly linked to their own experience of faith. And number three was this evangelizing spirit, right? Is that, especially I experienced it moving here to the United States, when so many Catholics would say, faith is private, and so people didn't actually evangelize. They didn't invite people to be part of the faith community. And so and then you shift, on from that perspective, from post-Christian to pre-Christian. You say, in pre-Christian world, people just don't know what they don't know. So in Hawaii, I talked to some people who are public school teachers, and they said, in high school, and they said, it's fascinating because teaching history, you use some of the Bible parables or stories from the Bible, and the students just have no idea what they are talking about. They're like, the Good Samaritan, or they are like, oh, I don't know what they are talking about. So that's one, is you cannot presume that the culture is informed by Christian principles. Number two is that, therefore, Christianity has some sense of novelty and discovery that gets exciting. And number three is that what we find is that even though Gen Zs are still the least practicing and the least Christian, and 30% of them don't believe anything, those who are leaning into Christianity, into Catholicism, are jumping with both feet, as we said before on this podcast, and they're bringing others. And so those are kind of first theme that I spoke about. And what's interesting is how many people actually responded to it. Like, when you give talks across the world, you always expect that number of people would say, well, this is not true, or this is not what I see.
It makes sense in your context.
That's right, not in my
experiencing
context.
here.
And what's interesting is that in this global experience I had over the last 4 months traveling, people actually say, yeah, that's our experience. That's what we are seeing.
Which I think to some extent points out how different the generations behind us, Z and Alpha, are to even our generation. Because from the get-go, they have been hyper-connected and able to see the world in a way that we couldn't, right? Like, even though we had internet and we have, social media now and connectivity, and you feel globally connected, we didn't grow up in a world that was like that. I mean, you grew up in Poland during, the communism, right?
Or not,
and talk about like a giant literal wall that separated the East from the West. And so that doesn't exist anymore for young people all across the world. There is no limitation in terms of what they can see, what they can observe, what they can learn. They have access to everything, right? And they are much more connected around the world. They may not feel the sense of belonging, but they're at least, connected. And so I think the experiences that young people are going through are going to be much more similar across cultures, because they're all wrestling with the same foundational things, right? They are hyper connected. There's, a lot of more loneliness. There's social isolation. They all went through COVID. I mean, so it's all of these things that kind of put the entire generation across the world on a level playing field. And it's interesting that that's proving out too, that they're all going through very similar things, and they're actually able to probably communicate with each other, or at least see how others are experiencing, right? So maybe it amplifies it so well.
Yeah,
so
the social media,
right?
for sure does, right? That's the interesting thing. That's what I heard at the Alpha Global Leadership Conference.
Because you had a chance to be in London as well, right?
And talking to a ton of the priests and church leaders from different Christian churches. What is interesting is exactly what you're naming, is this idea that they're not only connected, but they also are honest about their search, and that validates the search of everybody else, right? So you see a lot of people who have a lot of followers on social media who just say, oh, I'm searching, like I'm going to church on Sunday, I'm praying rosary, and then all of a sudden people are like, hey, maybe rosary is actually good for me, like I don't know what rosary is, right? And so you start seeing some of those movements really happening globally. And therefore, there's a difference. That's also something that I was trying to illustrate in my talks to the priest in different places. And that is that, because they already are exposed to so much of the Catholicism online, on their devices, their starting point is radically different than it used to be. So even here at St. Clement, the young people who are coming, who sometimes never physically been to a church building,
Yeah,
period.
they've learned a lot.
They already
through these
said,
videos.
I've been listening to Father Mike Schmitz for a year
Bishop
now,
Barron
or
or
Bishop
whatever,
Barona, or you
Barron,
name
yeah.
it. And therefore, I already know so much. I just need a place to practice it. I need a place where I can belong, and I can, or a place where I can grow in my relationship with other people. So to some extent, the blessing is that the Holy Spirit uses actually technology in a way I never thought technology would be used, which is for conversion of the hearts. The hearts are being changed. And now the church's place is to be attentive to this change, accompany them, and then support them in understanding that it's not me and my Jesus.
Right.
It's us as a community of the church. And that's where the challenge and the opportunity is, right?
I think that's really good. No, that's a good point, right? So you, playing back what I'm hearing, some of the themes that you heard and kind of are walking away from this time of sabbatical, this bit around the younger generation going through this desire for more, and that's something that's felt globally, not just locally here in Chicago. I think this idea that social media and the internet and everything that's available online can be a tool for evangelization, can be the only one, but it's almost like a pre-entry point, right? And people actually have an ability to access so much more of the Christian and Catholic faith and any faith now than they ever did, right? They don't need to go to a church to learn that. They can go learn it by themselves.
Exactly.
And then I think, this third piece that you're talking about is this whole point about like, what does a parish need to do to be ready for this moment, right? What else stood out? I think you were in Poland for a bit. You had a chance to spend some time with people from Asia. You're getting ready for hosting, the On Mission gathering in a couple of months here with people
Chicago,
from all over the
right.
world.
If you're interested, email us.
Yeah.
We would love you to join us. We have about 50 church leaders coming for that.
Yeah. So what else?
In the world.
What else stood out?
The other thing that stood up for me clearly is that as the Holy Spirit is doing something with young people, which I don't think anybody questions anymore, the Holy Spirit is also doing something with the bigger church, I think. And so what was interesting is in speaking to priests, again in Hawaii, New York, Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Poland, Spain, in Asia, Philippines, Malaysia. What I heard speaking with those guys is really a level of openness that surprised me, right? And it's not like the priests are not open, but there's less and less of us, and we are more and more stretched as priests. And therefore, new things are not necessarily seen by us as a gift, but as additional thing that we need to now do, and we already are stretched. And so, in many ways, you and I, in our work in the Archdiocese of Chicago, we had to kind of convince the pastors why something was important and why they should, create space in their calendar for this evangelistic outreach, right? And that actually is less and less of a case. What I found in talking to pastors is that they really are more and more open. I think seeing on social media that the churches are growing again, seeing a lot of young people asking those deep questions, I think got the church leaders, pastors and lay leaders in the church really excited. I mean, in Hawaii, the blessing of being there was, it's so beautiful. The curse of being there, I was there during
a typhoon, right?
Yeah, I know. When, I think the worst in 20 some years of what they were telling me. I don't know if that's true, but it did feel like it, believe me. The world was close to an ending up there. And I went to visit a number of parishes from Newman Center to some parishes on the other side of the island of Oahu. And, people were really ready. What's interesting is, if you know anything about Hawaii, about 10% of Honolulu population are people who are in the army, right? Servicemen and women.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's 10%. Plus, if you add their families and everybody, I think you're like at 30. And so many people living there were in service, and now they just live there. And so what was interesting is so many parishes, there were people who had incredible careers in public service in Navy, Army, you name it, Air Forces, and who lived there, and now they're retired and have this incredible global perspective and really deep desire to help church to grow. And that was really cool for me, just to see this openness of church leaders to engage in something new. So in speaking to Alpha, again, in the past, it would take so much energy to kind of convince people why Alpha is the right tool, why they should try it, how to structure it. And people are just ready. They're just tell us how, connect us with resources. We want to do it. And I felt very inspired about it because, again, what that tells me is it's just not technology. It's not just social media. It's just not the vibe, if you will. I really believe it's the Holy Spirit. I think God is really doing something incredibly new in the church and in our times. And I think we as a church have really a great, it's an act of obedience to act on it, but also a great opportunity to say, thank you, Holy Spirit, for answering the prayers for all those people who over the last 60 years in this country have been praying for growth. And now that we see growth, let's just cultivate it. Let's bring people into relationship with Jesus, open our churches, and be open to new movements that the Holy Spirit is bringing. And what I find is people are really open.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I was thinking about this, right? Like you were in London a month or so ago, and that was, what, 8 years? 8 years ago? 7 years ago when we first went to the leadership conference?
I think it was 8.
8. How different, right, the experience probably was from that first time, right? Where I think, I mean, Divine Renovation was getting going. I think
That's
they were,
right.
like 3-4 years into like really becoming more of a global movement, and Alpha in the Catholic Church was like starting to pick up steam. And I mean, I think it was always there, but I think there's been a bit more of an inflection point. And what the last 8 years have brought, I think there's just, to your point, greater openness, greater desire, in a true just inclination towards trying something new and giving evangelization a shot and making it the heart of a parish, right?
Like how radically different the conversations are,
yeah,
right?
that's what I was kind of thinking. It's like, wow, I bet it was just so different that you don't have to try to convince anyone. You're not trying to bring people to convince them. You're not trying to bring people to show them like, look what it could be. It's more about like, okay, like what is this? What do you take away from this that you can then share with others, or what the next step looks like for you and your parish?
But you even remember the themes when we would go to like pastors' workshops or church leader workshops. Like so many themes were about shrinking church. Remember, and that's just not what we are talking about anymore.
No, it's not.
And that's crazy because I never ever presumed that would be the case.
Well, what's interesting though, you said this, and maybe this is for another time, Zach, maybe make note of this one, but we are still living in a moment of shrinkage, because but that doesn't mean that growth isn't happening, right? So you said how you as priests, there's less and less of you, right? I mean, I remember one point looking at a chart, 10 years ago, maybe not longer, when we were at the Arch, of the distribution of ages, right, of pastors, and how close, I don't even remember what percentage of the priest population was near retirement. And there's like a cliff, right? Because there's like, it's not like you can just bring priests out of the walls and all of a sudden you have 100 pastors that can lead parishes. That's just not the reality. So it's a topic that I think is worth digging more into, right? Which is like, you as a priest, pastors and lay leaders, like you're having more and more responsibility for more and more people, more and more locations, more and more assets, more and more communities. Your time has not multiplied, right? But your mission field has multiplied. And that's a really, like, growth is great, but growth can break an individual and organization if you don't really prepare for it, right? And especially now in a moment where resources, not financially, but like resources from a people standpoint, are scarcer than the need, if you will, for the ministry is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that we're gonna see a great, um, I don't know, great things are gonna come out of it. They have to, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like you look back and you have 100 priests, lined up ready to come in, right? Something's gonna have to change, and for people like you and other priests like the ones you met, I think the big question is like, so how can I do how do I do all of this, right? Like, how do I put my parish on mission and bring people along while at the same time managing, the busyness of parish life, and then managing a church that's growing, year over year. Like, that's a lot. That is a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Yeah.
But it's an
And
exciting time.
and I think part of it is also because the growth is so calls for so much uh, investment and so much focus. I think that's where also the challenge is, for the church right now is, you cannot treat. Always say that, right? Alpha cannot be just another program.
Right.
If you're running it as a doorway to your church,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to be very distinct,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to make sure that that's how you build it. And then this culture of evangelizing church, that really takes heart. Being now appointed, administrator of the church just a mile away from here. What we've done at Clement in the last 6 years, now we will engage again with parishioners and the leaders of St. Teresa to do the same thing there, and it might look different, might have a different flavor, but it will have the same goal, right? Is to glorify God and bring people into life-changing relationship with Jesus. And I'm super excited about it. But also on the flip side, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was so much work to start, to build the awareness, to build the conviction, to build the freedom, to pray into it, and then have people respond to it. So I'm looking forward to it. At the same time, I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel what a lot of guys who are starting it feeling.
Yeah.
It's like this will be a lot to
It will
move
be.
it from
Well,
maintenance to mission.
I think the one plus, and I think this is I think maybe something we talk about next year, depending on where we're at. But the momentum that this parish has, and the throes of people that are equipped, somewhat formed, somewhat ready,
Mm-hmm.
is more than there were 4 years ago, right? And so
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing to think about, right? Is like, as the growth begins, as you start to expand, as you start needing more people, are you then not just engaging them and your numbers are going up because you've got a lot of people at mass and engaging in programs, but like, how are you turning, we always talk about it, right? Like, from seekers to believers to disciples,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do we actually just get people to go from that threshold from believer to disciple more and more often, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that we're going to ever be able to manage something like that.
That's right.
Right?
People
Like,
need to disciple. Everybody has to disciple somebody
everybody's
else.
got to disciple someone else in the group, and that takes a greater level of ownership on the parishioner side, because I mean, the staff, there's always going to be limited amount of resource, and you can't have a staff of like 100 people administering
No,
to
you
10,000.
should.
Exactly.
Right? Because then you're entertaining people.
Yep.
And doing the work of discipleship, right? I think that I would become very weary of that church.
Yep.
Right? I think the role of the church is to shape the life of the disciples, so then they can start being the shapers, and that's really important.
And I think that's another piece, as we reflected on your time away, that's one of the things that came across too, that I think parish leaders and pastors and others are wrestling with, right? Is you have to think of yourself, your role as someone on staff differently, right? Your role on staff is not to own everything and run everything. Your role on staff is to create space and remove barriers for people to to answer the call that God has for them and to utilize their skills for the good of the kingdom, right? And it's requires a bit of letting go and trust and pouring into people, as opposed to like do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you mentioned a lot of people were wrestling as well as your talks and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Anything else that stood out? Or is there like as you think about the next year ahead, the next fiscal
Yeah,
year ahead, 26, 27, what's changed? Is there something, greater
yeah.
focus, greater clarity? Like what's on your mind?
Well, the greater clarity is I'm a little bit more at peace, just because I've seen how powerfully God is at work, and so what that gives me is a little bit more peace of saying, okay, it's so beyond us, it's so much bigger than
Yeah.
us, and so there's a sense of saying, um, it's not really all that important what I do, because it's God is already doing so much more, and so it's just responding, receiving the movement of God. So it becomes again an act of obedience for us as a parish. I think on the flip side, the exciting part is just um, learning how to do it again in another community, right? And how to create a bridge between this community and this part of Lincoln Park to the other community on the other side of Lincoln Park, which is only a mile away, and kind of say, okay, how are we church together, even though we have different flavors, different, you know, ways in which we do things? How do we partner together for evangelization of this neighborhood?
Yep.
And I'm really excited to see what God will do with that.
That's great. It'll be fun to be a part of it and see where it goes.
I will report it back to you.
We'll be back. A real test case of everything we've
That's
been
right.
talking
We'll start
about,
all
right?
over again.
We either keep going this podcast for a year or we find a different topic. Church renewal and growth. Anyway, it was good to catch up.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
What are we going to be talking about next?
So next, we want to talk a little bit about some foundational principles of what we do and why we do it. So we'll start this conversation on culture, and we'll talk a little bit about how you create intentional culture in the church and how do you communicate that culture. Part of it is on my mind because I have to do it at St. Teresa's of Avila, just down the street. On the flip side, so many of you, my brother priests and church leaders, you're starting in new roles in new churches. So we think it's really thoughtful to start it now. So as you are getting ready for the fall, for all the engagement of maybe in a new parish, if you're in a new parish, or new parishioners coming into your church, it's really important to, again, revisit some of those foundational things around culture and communicating culture and the parish engagement. So we all can build a stronger church together.
Sounds good. We'll see you next time.
Take care.